All right, everybody, it is 12 o'clock right now. Thank you all for being on. Um, sorry, sorry, email from somebody. Thank you all for being on. Glad that everybody is a part of our brown bag luncheon. Today we have Director Jill Fitchard, who is over the community oversight. Very glad that she is here to join us today. I know that she has already presented to Policies Committee last Thursday, but we definitely wanted to make sure, because I know she's a very important part of a lot of the work that you all are doing. And so we want to make sure that we have a better understanding of one, community oversight, also just to hear a little bit more about Director Fitchard, and then also just giving her the opportunity to be able to speak on a lot of things that she wants to discuss and that she has to present for us so that we do have a better understanding. After she gets done with, I guess, her small presentation, to discuss, we are going to open it up for question and answer period. And then after that is done, John Button will speak for about maybe a couple minutes or so, just to give up a summary. We might have a little bit more time if there's any questions for John. And then after that, we will close out our meeting. Again, if you do have any food, feel free to eat up. If you want to keep your screen off, that's most certainly fine. We just ask that everybody keeps their phones on mute as this is going on. If you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself to ask those questions. But once you're done, please make sure to mute yourselves again. I do know a lot about Jill just from some of our conversations, but I do feel it would be best if she just explains a little bit about herself first, and then we'll go from there. So I will, in some way, shape, or form or fashion, mini moderate this, but really I'm going to leave this in the hands of Director Fitchard. Again, Director Fitchard, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I have been with the Community Oversight Board since June of 2019. I have a background in policing, probation, parole. I spent my entire adult career in the criminal justice field in one way or another. And so I think I have a pretty good understanding of that system and how it works. Even here in Nashville, I was a police officer in Washington, D.C., and then I moved to Tennessee and I continued working with the criminal justice system. I also worked at the Tennessee Prison for Women for a while with the YWCA many, many years ago, before Miss Robeson was there. And I was a facilitator for a program that they had for pre-release. And so that probably predates her in that way. But so I think that I have a pretty good understanding of the criminal justice field here in Nashville in most capacities. So I wanted to start giving you guys a history of the Community Oversight Board. I'm not sure who's on this call that's super familiar with the ins and outs. And I thought it would be important for me to lay that foundation and then move into the culture that I have seen within Metro PD, as well as what I have heard from officers who have reached out to me. Excuse me. So the history of the Community Oversight Board: in October of 2016, the Driving While Black report recommended that the Oversight Board be implemented after analyzing those traffic stops in Nashville. In 2017 and 18, 2 Black men were shot and killed by Mmpd. That was Jacquees Clemens in 2017, and that was Daniel Hambrick in 2018. During that time, in February of 2017, after Mr. Clemens was killed, it sparked outrage in the city, and it actually started this grassroots process of forming the Community Oversight Board. And it was a big coalition group. I want to say it was at least 60 coalitions or community groups that joined into this coalition. It was in January of 2018 that they went before the Metro City Council, and the Metro City Council voted against a public hearing on creating the Oversight Board. But on April the 4th, which was the 50th year anniversary of the death of Martin Luther King, the coalition decided to move forward with bringing the issue directly to the Nashville voters as a Metro Charter amendment. And then it was in July of 2018, that same year, that Daniel Hambrick was shot and killed. On November the 6th of 2018, Amendment 1 was ratified by 59% of the voters, which that totaled up to be 134,000 voters in Nashville that voted to have a community oversight board. And then the community oversight board, of course, was born. In January of 2019, the first 11 board members were elected and confirmed by Metro Nashville, and then they met for the first time in February of 2019. The first executive director was hired in April of 2019, and the first staff members were hired in June of 2019. In November of 2019, the executive director resigned, and in December 2019, the assistant director, who was myself at the time, became the newest executive director. And so when I talk about that, I'm showing you how much has happened in a very short period of time. From January of 2019 to where we are today, 18, 19 months, we have just really worked really hard to get this up and running. And I'm going to move into the challenges. But before I do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about different oversight models across the country and the power and authority of the Nashville COB. So the common models for civilian oversight bodies are the review focus model, the investigative focus model, monitoring and auditing model, and the hybrid model. And Nashville is a hybrid model. And this model is preferred because it has the ability and option to operate as an investigative, auditor, and monitor, which provides the greatest amount of accountability for civilian oversight. Amendment 1 outlines our power and duties under Section 11.302 of the Charter, and it states, the board has the power to investigate allegations of MMPD officer misconduct against members of the public, as well as issue policy, advisory, and resolution reports, and have the option of establishing a monitoring program that provides an ongoing review or audit of the complaint process administered by MMPD's Office of Professional Accountability. The board also has the option of forwarding resolution reports that produce factual findings of criminal misconduct and civil rights violations to the district attorney, the grand jury, or the United States attorney. So, that's a very robust charge, and it gives us a lot of opportunity to hold officers in the Metropolitan Police Department accountable. So the COB has a staff that handle the day-to-day operations of the department. The staff is made up of myself and 9 other full-time employees. We have an assistant director, a legal advisor, 3 investigators, a community liaison, administrative assistant, and 2 research analysts. And we call ourselves the Metro Nashville Community Oversight, or MNCO, to separate the staff from the board, to kind of keep down confusion. That confusion was kind of happening early on, where board members would be out in the public and community members would, talk to them about investigations or complaints. And so we had to kind of make a separation there. So that kind of closes out the history portion. I'll move into the challenges. And if you've been in Nashville within the last, 18 months, then you are aware of some of the challenges that we faced. Those challenges aren't really unique to Nashville. I think that every oversight agency across this country have experienced the same challenges because it's new. It was new to the city, new to the board, the staff, the community, as well as the police department. And so, as we all know, oversight isn't the most comfortable thing. And it's definitely something that was wanted, that this is what the community voted for. And it's also, in my opinion, something that was definitely needed. So some of the challenges that we faced were building a new agency from the ground up without a lot of support and very little guidance from Metro government. Understanding the process and the role that we played with MMPD, the community, and other governmental departments. The emergency notification call out process was very difficult. It became an issue. Obtaining access to records to begin investigations and meet the needs of the community. Crime scene access, relationship building with stakeholders. There was lack of trust from the police department in the COB and our investigation process. Lots of misunderstandings, lack of cooperation. Timelines, getting things accomplished took months. That still has been the case, but hopefully we're moving forward in that. And there were multiple changes in leadership. We had a change in the mayor and his administration. During that time, we had lost our mayor liaison, our criminal justice liaison. We had our ED resign, and we had board member turnover due to expired terms. And so I would say that the challenges that we went through, it was definitely some tumultuous times for the board. I think the board on occasion felt burned out and, disempowered. There, they were just going in circles at times. There was lots of frustration that they weren't making significant progress, and feeling like the administration misunderstood the importance of their role in the collaboration of the two agencies. But I think although that there were all of these challenges, I think that the board, stayed the course. They were very committed to what was happening in our community. That was, I think, the thing that kind of empowered them to keep moving forward and keep pushing. The board has met over 45 times. I think it's closer to 50 during this 19 months. And the board is made up of people who are volunteers, and they are volunteering their time. They also have some of them have full-time jobs. And so they have been super, super proactive with reaching out to stakeholders, asking for their support, also helping create our bylaws, our rules, our processes, and then supporting me as the executive director and our team. But I would say that during this time, there was little coordination with Mmpd under Chief Anderson's leadership. During the transition of leadership, there was this intersection of building and setting priorities. And so the building pieces, we also had to build out our infrastructure, which was a huge endeavor that was happening at the same time as our challenges were taking place. We had a brand new space. They had to knock walls down. They had a lot of work to do. So I also was like the quasi, property construction site person, right? So anyway, I became really focused on, taking care of that, but also where we were experiencing deficits in our internal processes. And it was clear that outreach was lacking, as well as our connecting with Mmpd stakeholders. I also had this super ambitious calendar because I thought doing ride-alongs would be a really good way to connect with officers, to see what they were experiencing, hear what they had to say. And so I wanted to do that. I set my calendar to have these ride-alongs, every few weeks, to ride with officers at the different precincts, and also to host community listening sessions and trainings. And then, of course, a tornado hit 3 months under my watch, and COVID happened. And so then we had to pivot and start, how do we get the work done from home, right? And have this entire operation kind of start over remotely. So that was a challenge. My priorities were at that time hiring an assistant director, community education and outreach, structuring our internal processes, creating SOPs, obtaining access to Mmpd records so that we could also have access to crime scenes. And I'll talk a little bit about the negotiation process with the new MOU after this segment. We also were creating advisory reports on Mmpd policy and policing practices. We were, my priorities were connecting with MMP stakeholders and creating the process for resolution reports for the alleged misconduct to move forward to the board for resolution, because we were still taking in lots of complaints. And so we were still investigating those, trying to figure out, what was going on with that without having any access to all the stuff that we needed from MMPD. So I figured, as I went through this process, like what we needed was real police accountability, transparency, and cooperation. And, I think that starts with the people, in the community supporting us. We have the support of the board. The MNCO staff is supportive of one another, but we needed the support of the people in the community, our council members, the the mayor's administration, and all of those who could help move this agency forward. And so NACO is our national organization. It lists meaningful oversight as those that have independence, are community driven, empowered, proactive, and transparent. And I would say that Nashville has built its oversight agency on those principles. We have one of the strongest oversight models in the country. And with the cooperation of MMPD, we can meet all the national best practices. Those best practices in oversight start with having unfettered access to department data and records, subpoena power, the review of police disciplinary and personnel files, the authority to investigate, to take testimony, audit, or review internal investigations or processes, and make policy recommendations. Our operating budget is built into the charter. The board can make disciplinary recommendations, and police misconduct data will be posted publicly for greater transparency and accountability. So I believe that we're making strides to be an agency where our staff is credentialed oversight practitioners and our agency is accredited through the national organization. Because ultimately our goal is to be a national model for effective oversight and have the most impactful board in the country. And we also want our collaboration with the police department to be one that others across the nation can look to as an example of how to work together for the betterment of the communities that they serve, that we all serve. And so we have been contacted by many people across this country who are taking note of what's happening in Nashville regarding police oversight. And so I'm very happy with where we are. I think that, you know, we are in a new place as it pertains to our MOU. We have had 2 negotiation meetings. We have agreed to some things, and we'll have one more negotiation meeting where we change some language, and we'll present it to our executive committee soon, so that we can get that signed off on. And, you know, I think that that would be definitely, it takes off some of the pressure of how do we get this stuff done in a timely fashion. And so I'm very happy about that. And hopefully, once we get the new language in there, we can complete the work that we've been mandated to do. I think that we are aligned in our mission to move this city into the 21st century policing model and have a police department that represents the needs of all communities in Nashville in an equitable and respectful way. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about the culture. And I want to move into the topic of culture in policing because I've had time to speak to some officers directly about their experience and what the culture is like within MMPD. But I'll speak about the culture in a more broader way and hopefully shed some light on a few issues that I think should be highlighted for your benefit and for the work of your commissions. So, excuse me, the demands of policing. We know that policing, and I know this from firsthand experience, is a difficult and tough job. Many officers are stressed, overworked, underpaid. They work tons of hours while also trying to balance their everyday lives. Many feel pressured to perform and are on edge. And research from the Brookings Institute suggests that 80% of officers have chronic stress, 90% never seek help. Chronic meaning depression, anxiety, easily angered or agitated, suffer from family problems, the same kind of problems that we have in our own daily lives. And so this is happening at the same time that they are policing the streets in our communities. The institution of policing creates policies that lead to officers being able to work overtime hours and multiple part-time jobs where they may also work long hours. The result can lead to fatigue, exhaustion, health issues, and the lack of self-care, you know, where I think most of that just goes unchecked. And so this can have a residual effect on some officers not being able to perform well, which can cause internal reprimands and sanctions for things such as wrecking a car or using foul language, showing up for duty late, not following personnel policies, and et cetera. Whatever those things are internally. And so these issues may also be contributing factors to many negative encounters in the community where they serve. And so I would say, to put this in perspective, I'm going to use this example. Truck drivers cannot drive more than 11 hours without getting approval for a 2-hour driving extension. They cannot exceed a total of 14 hours of work time in a day, which includes stops, breaks, lunch, loading, etc. And they are unable to have secondary employment. So a question that I would like to pose to you or for you to consider in the scope of your job with this commission is how do you enhance policies that create checks and balances that takes into account the well-being and health of the officers, considers the safety of the community without overly restricting an officer's ability to earn more income? I would suggest that you carefully review the MMPD's policy on early intervention. That section is 2.30, and secondary employment section, which is section 4.30 of the police manual. And so then there's this other side of the culture that we don't really necessarily pay close attention to, and that is the notion of this blue family or what it means to be blue. I think that it builds solidarity with the recruits, and it's the thing that is perpetuated in training academies across the country. It creates an identity through indoctrination where an officer begins to lose his or her sense of self and become more aligned with what they do, and less focus is on who they were. So they become John or Jane, the police officer, instead of John or Jane Doe. It's no longer just an occupation, but it becomes who the person is. Some of that happens because in police departments across the country, policy states that you must have your weapon on you at all times. So you're always on duty, always on guard, even when clocked out of the job. It's nothing new to those who have been in the military, but to those who haven't experienced this type of training, they go through this layer of rebirthing, so to speak, to become one with the institution. So heads are shaved, everyone is dressed alike, and slowly the officer becomes the warrior they are training to become. They spend most of their time with other police officers and may stop hanging out with old friends as much or sometimes all together. And once in this blue family, it's very hard to navigate. Officers don't talk to many outside of the system, so the pressure to assimilate is very strong. Moreover, they can feel a need to support those that stand beside them. They understand the pressure of speaking up about things they witness or experience or that they feel isn't right. And after a while, that holding the weight of silence can be isolating, cause low morale, and add to the chronic stress that I mentioned earlier. So, calling out unethical policing has really dire consequences, such as being stigmatized, called a snitch, and also being ostracized. And however, I think for female and minority officers, this issue has even more consequences. They are less likely to get promoted, and when they do, they get the worst detail in assignments. That's what I was told from officers who came and spoke to me. They said MMPD has a history of that. Many Black officers who got promoted were assigned to the third or midnight shifts after promotion. It has been alleged that they are also disciplined in a harsher way and less likely to be given the same benefit of the doubt as others who are non-minorities when issues arose internally. So navigating in this culture, I think, is really difficult for these officers, for officers in general, whose intentions were to join the police department to help the communities they serve. Those ideals of protecting and serving people are quickly dissolved. In a more holistic approach in a more holistic approach to policing, the training of officers would balance the physicality of policing and focus more on using an officer's communication and de-escalation skills that rely heavily on conflict resolution and community building, less of this us versus them. So to take a little dive into this is a little deeper into the past culture of MMPD. For many years, and really just up to 3 years ago, the MMPD trained out of a textbook that was entitled The Tactical Edge. This book espouses that minorities are a threat, as is the children left in daycare because they are more prone to be violent. The book is no longer used in MMPD training, but every MMPD officer up until 2017 was given the book while in the training academy. MMPD stated that they didn't teach out of the entire book, but they issued the book to all new recruits. And in full disclosure, I'll say that when I was a police officer, I was never given this book and I had no knowledge of this book until 2017. And then I purchased it so that I could be aware of what was inside and for my own knowledge and understanding. The impression that the tactical edge may have left on new recruits could have long lingering effects. And the book had the potential, I think, to create the us versus them mentality, which could have completely erased a recruit's idealistic view of being a community guardian. So I'm going to close with this excerpt from the back cover of the book. It says, I like the edge, the challenge. I get a high off of it. You're out there in the concrete jungle or in the cornfield jungle. You know the guy you're up against has no regard for authority or society. He doesn't care about you, but he knows he's got to go and you've got to go get him. I like the element of danger. It makes me feel alive. But I don't expose myself to danger blatantly. I'm not going to give anybody the opportunity to get even just a little bit of me if I can help it. Going up against danger and coming out whole because I'm prepared tactically. That's what the rush comes from. My dad used to say there are no new frontiers. They've all been explored. But in our society, there's still one, the street. It's the only place you can be that has any edge to it. And that's on the back of the book. And so I would say that officers that were taught from the Tactical Edge book will need constant retraining on cultural competency, inclusiveness, explicit bias, and equity-based policing. My suggestion is that it be an in-service they attend at least twice a year. I believe the work of the COB can assist with some of the issues of policy and training with MMPD if they first acknowledge that they need the assistance. I can understand how it could be hard for any paramilitary organization to invite civilians and some who may never have worked as police officers to assist with the restructuring of policies and training. However, I believe that MMPD is open to improving their policing policies and practices, where officers have their own identity, serve their community in a healthy work environment, absent of harassment or ridicule, and that safety nets are in place for those who feel they need help. The COB will continue to review policy, audit, and monitor police practices and policy within MMPD. And I think that there can be success if the leadership is willing to sit down and discuss the problems and issues, have a roadmap to success with measurable outcomes and actionable results. Thank you for having me, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Fitchett. I really appreciate that. For those who are on their computers or have capabilities, use the raise your hand button, and when I see it, I'll make sure to answer your question. I'll start off with this first, though, Dr. Fitchett, especially with you also being a former police and now being the director. I think you had said something about the Blue Lives piece that you kind of think that way 24/7. What was that transition like? For yourself, especially, and now being a director of the Community Oversight Board? I mean, how do you think about that with both sides? How does that inform your work? But how can you explain that to us so that we understand that, especially with me never being a police officer?
Yeah, it was a very hard transition for me. I worked, especially when you continue to work in the field. So even though I stopped being a police officer who had arrest powers, I still thought like a police officer, like meaning I was overly suspicious of everything. And I'm not saying that this is the way that everyone thinks, but this is the way that I think that the indoctrination or the socialization within the policing group causes you to think like that for many, many years. I see it, at times, even when I work with the people that are on, that I have hired who are ex-police officers. But I would say that it took me many, many years. And even when I went to work for the public defender's office, I still thought as a cop, like I was looking at perspective through the lens of a police officer, opposed to, helping work on cases regarding the best for the clients that we were serving. And so the longer that you're there, I believe that it does have a really strong impact on your ability to look at things from a different lens.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We have a hand raised from Whitney Washington, who's the vice chair over the workforce committee. Whitney, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask your question.
Yeah, hi. One, thank you so much for sharing with us, Jill. I have two questions, which one is sort of speaking to sort of like this culture, this, sort of me against the world type thing, do you have any experience or knowledge about like how social media plays into that? And if there's like anything that can be done like administratively to sort of prevent that? And also, can you speak to anything about difficulty recruiting people of color right now to join the force?
Yeah, okay. So for your first question, I would say that, I mean, we can't monitor people's social, media behavior outside of work. But, and there's policies in place in regards to, I think that there's also, well, Metro government has a social media policy. And then there is a social media policy within MMPD. And so I think it's a super strict policy. So I don't know how much of the culture is formulated or really dealt with in regards to social media. To be honest, I don't really have a real clear understanding on if the social media is driving police behavior. As for recruiting, I think that recruiting minorities is challenging. I mean, when you think about what it entails to be a police officer, what we're seeing in the media regarding policing, and how well received policing is or isn't, I think it really drives the recruitment process. And so I think that number one, it has to be a more attractive pay, right? It has to be more attractive pay. And I really strongly believe that having people from the community that they live in, police, would be a very helpful start. When I was a police officer in Washington, D.C., we had to live within the city, right, that we were policing in. And there were incentives for us to do that. And so, yeah, I think that recruiting will be tough, but I think that um, there's got to be some measures such as going out to colleges and universities, setting up some job fairs, and not necessarily just sugarcoating everything, but I think that people are moving away from this warrior mentality of policing and using a more intelligent based kind of recruitment process. And so, yeah, I think that it will be it will be challenging for MMPD to recruit more minorities. I do think one of the things too that we will have to look at is you're doing a complete background on people who sometimes have things in their background that might be considered, you know, undesirable. And so we have to look at, are those things that people can recover from? Are we holding, them to much stricter, particular guidelines than we do for other jobs? And so, and if we are, why? And let's talk about that. Of course, integrity is a very important thing. But if you have something that you did when you were 15, doesn't necessarily, spill over to now that you're 30. So we need to look at that. So I hope I answered your question.
You did. Thank you.
Great. Are there other questions? Again, feel free to use the raise your hand feature. For those who have their hand up, just, okay, there we go. We have a former council member, Phil Ponder. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We appreciate you being here today. Give us an update. That was very educational on the formation of the committee. And I wanted to ask you two questions. First, you said that your goal was to be a shining example throughout the country. How many other comparable cities to Nashville in size have these kind of boards set up?
Okay, yeah. So that's a great question. So there's over 160 community oversight boards, or they call them different things. Some people call them community oversight boards, police accountability boards, civilian accountability boards. Right now, there's over 160. And after the incident that happened in Minneapolis, so many more are trying to move forward with forming. I think they said that it was at least 40 to 60 that they had been, when I talk about them, I'm talking about NACO, our national organization, had been reached out to. So it is happening more and more, specifically for the same size cities for Nashville. I would say that it would be more than half of that 160 that are comparable in size. But what I will say, Mr. Ponder, is that Nashville's Community Oversight Board, written into the charter, and the particular authorities and powers that we have, is the strongest across this country, just about. And that we are getting calls. I have received multiple calls on people wanting to know how to structure it. What are some of the pros and cons? I've gotten calls from other police chiefs and administrators across this country who want to know how they can connect better with their communities. And so I think that Nashville can be, once we get everything in place, will be the gold standard and the model. I definitely believe that.
Well, thank you very much for explaining that. My second question is kind of a loaded question. What is your assessment of how your organization has been accepted with the new interim police chief?
So since Chief Drake has taken over as the chief for this time period, it actually has been really a good working relationship. He has reached out to me on multiple occasions, invited us to investigate cases. His team has been very forthcoming with information and sharing. And so I think that it has been good, and hopefully going forward, whoever becomes the chief, it would continue in that vein.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate you answering those very honestly. I appreciate it very much. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Director Fitchard, they really like you. We have about 4 people that have their hand up right now. I'll start with is that 5 now? We have 5 now. We'll start with the first one, who was Sabina of the American Muslim Advisory Council. We'll go first, and then next after that, we'll have Demetria Kaladimos from the Nashville Banner, and then I'll get to the other 3 after that.
Thank you, Director Fitchard, for enlightening us on the work of the MNCO. I had a question, because I'm on the workforce committee, and we're talking about attrition within the police department, and realizing that we don't have much data as to why people leave, and if you have some insight on that. And then I had a second question just about how rules, what are you hearing? And you touched on it, but within the department, officers complaining on how rules are applied differently to different officers, and how some are scrutinized more, and how this affects the promotional process within Mmpd.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of information on why people leave. I think that is something that we can try to pull together for you, in the next few weeks, so that you have that, get some research done. I do know that when people leave, they have, of course, people leave because, from my direct knowledge, some people leave because they don't, if they're getting disciplined, they don't necessarily like the discipline that was given to them. And so they may not accept it. They may leave because in lieu of discipline, they decide to leave. And then also, I think that these records are something that Metro HR would have. And I think that if we can figure out and get with you and the committee to determine what it is that we need to ask them, that I think that we can pull some of that information for you. And as for your second question, yeah, I think that officers have made assertions that discipline has been doled out differently under the last administration. And I think that it's something that MMPD should work on. I personally am working towards, as I begin to create these proposed resolution reports, as I look at the disciplinary grid and factor in all the things that they have in there, it is a difficult thing. There is a lot of room for error and to to give one person this and give somebody else something different, you know, and it looks as if there is some, you know, favoritism or whatever. And so I think that the discipline grid and how discipline is doled out definitely needs to be looked at as it pertains to policy. I'm experiencing that personally as I am coming, you know, creating these proposed resolution reports that will go before the board. So
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have Demetria Kaladimos next, and then after that, we have Councilman Russ Pulley after that.
Thank you, and thanks for making yourself available, Director Fitchard. I want to follow up a little bit on that Tactical Edge book. I know you said it's out of use now, but do you have a read as to the percentage of the current force that was trained with that? And who chooses current curriculum and materials, and does MNCO have a say in that?
Yeah, so the Tactical Edge, everyone that up until March of 2017, everyone before that has received this book as curriculum. It was a pretty controversial thing once the book was discovered that it was used for, recruitment, for the recruitment classes. And so I would say that it was used from the late 80s up until 2017. And so I believe that that's the number that I have of the people that have it. We don't have a say-so in the curriculum. And even when they were using this book, it was told that they weren't using the entire book, just certain sections. But the book was still given to the recruit officer. So even if it wasn't taught out of it, they still had it in their possession. And so I would say for the curriculum piece, we haven't been invited in. I think that there's so many more wonderful books and textbooks and trainings that we could help them with in figuring out which books would be helpful for training. And so that's something that I haven't really explored yet. We've got so many things to explore, but I haven't been able to get into that as of yet. But I think that that's a good idea that we sit down with whoever is over the training and talk about some of the curriculum. I have asked for and received the curriculum when we first started because I wanted to review it and see what classes that I wanted to attend myself. And so we kind of haven't really went back to that place because there was so many things happening so quickly. But we do have a pin in that. And so I think it would be a very good thing for the MNCO to be involved with choosing curriculum.
Great. I thought we had Councilman Pulley. I see that we actually have his assistant, Chelsea Marberdock, that's going to be speaking. And then after that, we have Clifton Harris of Urban League, Middle Tennessee after that.
Hi, guys. I'm Chelsea. I'm helping Russ on this project. And thank you so much, Dr. Jill, for this great overview. I took a lot of notes. I have a couple of just follow-up questions about some of the things that you said. One in particular, as I've been reviewing some of the proposals that have come through already within the committee and discussions being sent around on email, I noticed that this recruitment piece seems to be something that really stands out and could be a place where any policy recommendations could make a big impact. And you mentioned that when you were a police officer in DC, that you were, if I have this right, you were getting you had to live within the community you were policing in, and there were incentives for you to do that. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little more to what those incentives were. That's my first question.
Sure. So you got your rent was discounted. You got, they had discounted rent for you, and they also had a program similar to they have in Memphis, where police officers, if you live within certain zip codes, that would help with the closing of your house. I think they had some type of incentive there. Also, here, I may have it mixed up with Memphis, but teachers get it as well. So you live in areas that, but would say were areas that needed more policing or were inner city areas or had more calls for service. And so if we lived in those areas, if you parked your car there too, you would get those types of discounted in your rent. You would get your closing costs paid or no down payments. And they had that mixed in with, the city's budget in the governmental budget.
So to clarify, was that a part of was that a part of like the Metro budget? Was that worked into the Metro budget process, or was that worked into like specifically the the DC police budget?
So yeah, I think that was dealt with Metro. And so remember, DC is not a state.
Right.
And so everything was, I don't know much about their budgets, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, that's totally.
That was definitely a part of the city government's budget. Now, how those two intertwined, whether a portion of it came out of I doubt a portion of it came out of the police budget, to be honest with you. I think that definitely was the city government.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I'm just thinking like what that looks like when you try and operationalize a program like that, like where the money comes from and who, proposes that and puts it forward. And then as a follow-up question, do you know how many, like what percentage, even just roughly, of police officers that are Mmpd live in Davidson County versus the ones that live outside of Davidson County?
Yeah, I don't know the percentage, but I do know that the majority of police officers live outside of the city.
Okay.
And they live, and I don't know, and I should have looked this up for you guys. I'm sorry I didn't, but it may be something that we need to explore. I don't even know if they have to live within a certain mileage ratio or range. So like they could, I don't know if they can live, 80 miles away, or if they can live within the metropolitan area, which is within 25 miles,
Right. I mean, I don't know that it would really make a difference on it. I mean, from my perspective, because it's like, if you live 80 miles versus 20, like you're still not in the community, over which you're supposed to be patrolling. So like, to me, that's a huge difference in the kind of relationship that they would have, and like, whether they know the person that like runs the sandwich shop on the corner, or like whatever, the gas station, like that's just such a clear differential in, how well they would understand the community.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Oh, sorry. The reason why I said the ratio thing, the mileage thing, is because like if you're a commander, for instance, and you have a response time, and there's something that major happens, and it takes you 45 minutes to get to the city, I think that's problematic in that sense. Right. The other thing I will say is in Washington, D.C., when I first joined the police department, I was assigned to a foot beat, right? Like I had a community, that was my patrol. I didn't have a car. So I was walking my neighborhoods all the time. I was assigned a foot beat 24. But anyway, I was assigned to the foot, and there were many times that I was sitting on someone's porch because it was like I've walked around these 3 blocks for like 8 hours, right? And I'm not saying that we need to go to that level, because of course back then foot beats, everyone didn't have cars, right? So there was foot beats, scooters, cars, as well as bicyclists. So community policing was really taught when I was policing then. That was the era of community policing.
Thank you. So Dr. Fitchard, we have 2 more people. I know we have about 11 minutes left for this brown bag. So we have Clifton Harris, the CEO and president of Urban League Middle Tennessee. And then after that, our last question is from MNPS teacher, Eli Foster. So we'll go ahead and go to Clifton, I'm sorry.
I understand. Dr. Fitchard, thank you so much, for all the work that you do. We are fortunate to have you. 2 quick questions. One, are you currently working on a overwork policy? I mean, I really like your analogy about the truck drivers and stuff. And also, we got enough sense to do that for our truck drivers, but we can't do it for our police officers that we know are stressed. And we know, and all of those that are stressed won't come into to get the help and all that they need. So is there a policy that you all are working on that can kind of mandate, that help for our police officers?
Yeah, we haven't worked on it yet. To be honest with you, I have a binder of this much stuff that I want to work on. And so right now we're just working. I think we started with immigration, body cameras came out. We've only been in existence, really under my leadership since January. So it's something that I think that we need to explore. That's why I brought it up to you all, so that it is something that, once you get if you have the opportunity to talk about how that affects the police officers in general, right? Like how it affects how they police the community, but also like how does it enhance their quality of life? Right? Because if you're an officer and you have lots of bills, you have a young family, you're not making a whole lot of money. So you're putting in, 16, 17 hours, 18 hours, you get a few hours of sleep and then you're back on duty. I think it's challenging, and I think it will exacerbate issues where mistakes can happen really quickly. And so, yeah, we're not necessarily working on it now, but it is something that we have in our book of things that we need to look at. So, yeah.
And my last question is, you mentioned the blue family culture. Does harassment exist, happen within the blue family culture? And if so, why does it so often not go reported?
Yeah, I mean, the same things that any job experience that is predominantly, that is, when I say paramilitary, I'm talking military, any of these type of organizations that are predominantly male, you're going to have harassment. I don't want to say that you're always going to have it, but it can be prevalent. I know how that experience is, and I know people who, have been able to overcome those types of things. But yes, it does exist. It is real. How we combat that is the issue. How do we deal with that? How do we create safety nets for men and women in those jobs who feel either discriminated against, harassed, whether it be racially discriminated against, or it be sexual or just regular harassment? It doesn't necessarily always have to be sexual. How do we create a working environment for people where they feel safe and they feel confident and good about going to do the work that we are paying them to do to protect? If you're in a culture where every day you feel like you're harassed and you don't have anyone to be able to take this to, that spills over into how you deal with community members. And then you go to calls where you are trying to resolve issues of, let's just say, major issues or major crimes or heinous crimes, but you're also experiencing this type of pressure from within. It's challenging. It's something that we need to really dig deeper into. And hopefully I can help the police department with doing that and creating that safety net and that independence where people who feel harassed have an opportunity to go outside of the police department to handle these types of issues.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Our last question comes from Eli Foster. I think we have about 7 minutes left, and then from there we will go over to John Button.
Dr. Fisher, first of all, wow, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I have a series of questions because I'm incredibly long-winded. But my first one is, what do you know what text is currently replaced the tactical edge? So you said it was moved out in 2017. What is the current text that's being used?
I don't think they have a specific textbook that they're using.
Okay, the other thing is I'm a teacher, right? And I'm seeing significant parallels as you're talking about the police force and teaching, right? You're talking about being overworked, you're talking about being underpaid, you're talking about having a power dynamic with the people that you work with, where I am the one in power versus the students, right? All of these things are parallels to me. And as I'm thinking through this process, some of the old model in teaching sounded very familiar to the way that you are describing the old model for policing, which is don't smile till December. That's your classroom. You control the classroom. It's the same sort of thing that you read off the back of the book. So where I'm going with my question is, there's been a lot of work in teaching in the last several years to develop what we term a social-emotional learning approach. For training for police officers, is there training that exists, because you were talking about the need to have more training, that deals with getting at the issue of being able to see the community residents as people first, because that's the issue, right? You read the back of the book, you're seeing them as an enemy first, not as a person first. So what, can you speak some about that training that currently exists and how that helps kind of frame a mindset to say this is a person before that they're a perpetrator?
Right. So I think that Mr. Deputy Chief Huggins talked about it, as well as I think I don't remember. Sorry, the new guy that's over training, the new captain over training, but they do have a portion of training. I want to say it is maybe 36 hours. It could be 40. I don't think it's 40. I think it's 36 hours of how to deal with just basic like conflict resolution and some bias training. It definitely isn't robust enough. And then I think that it also only is hitting the surface. I don't think that it's the type of information that they have that would take them back to trying to, in my opinion, rethink this process that they have learned from the tactical edge, right? So it has to be something different. Because what they have is teaching new recruits who haven't been exposed to the book one thing, but what I was trying to get at is how we need to get together with the police department and figure out how we can go back and have them rethink what they have learned and unlearn those things, right? Because the unlearning piece is the most prevalent, and that's why I said it needs to be done a couple times a year, right? That in service, because when you're talking about in service, you're talking about what, an 8-hour day, maybe 2 days. And so technically out of a whole year, if you do it twice a month, you would have this type of training, you might get 16 hours. And they have to do the work themselves too. And it has to be, really acknowledged that that's not the way that we want to move forward. And if you were trained that way, we have a responsibility to try to help you unlearn those things. So
really you're looking at kind of a cultural shift and
yes.
how you view your role, sort of like what teaching is going. We're wrestling with the same thing. We're wrestling with the older teachers who just think it's about the information. Kids need the information, give them the information. Well, kids are not a silo. They're going through things, right? It's the person that you're teaching information to. Same thing for a police officer. It's the person you're engaging, whether they're a perpetrator or a victim. So I just want to wrestle with that in terms of how deep that needs to go to dig it out of what is currently there and to put in kind of a new framing. That's sort of where I was going, if that makes sense.
Okay, that does. I do. I appreciate that. And we can always, you guys can always follow up with me, right? And there's so many things that we haven't been able to uncover and discover. There's layers to it because me personally as the ED, I've spent a lot of my time with the infrastructure and the processes on how we're doing things. But once we get that in, really get that solid and in place, it is my goal to spend more time reviewing policies, making suggestions, sitting down with the administration of the police department, the leadership of the police department, and thinking about ways that we can, when we talk about reimagining, like how can we reimagine, and redirect too, right? So. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate it. We want to definitely make sure, even though everybody's on mute, that we give it up for Director Jill Fitchard. This was a great presentation. Very excited and very just happy for the clear explanations and definitely just what you do. We really definitely thank you for that. We're going to give it over to John Button. I know we're about to lose people soon, so I want to make sure that we get John to say the last piece, and then after that, we'll see some of you. Well, actually, I think it's both. We'll see half of you later today, and the rest of you will see Monday. So we'll give it over to John Button if he's still here. Yeah, there he is.
I'm still here. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Director Fitchard. I don't have anything to add. That was a very good overview. We've been working through a lot of really important issues. We've made very good progress, and I think we're all looking forward to wrapping up our MOU round 2 discussions. It's a really important step for the city to be taking, and I'm glad that's gone so smoothly. I also just wanted to talk about how much Mayor Cooper values your work and how we're all aware of how important relationships are, that the opportunity to sort of work with you and members of the board, to work with Acting Chief Drake, to work with general funk over in the DA's office and get some of these issues resolved, and just have relationships so that we can troubleshoot and be proactive. It's been really heartening. I think it's the direction we're definitely going to continue to go in. And there's lots of work ahead, and it's great to be building relationships so that we can all do it well. Thank you all for your involvement in this lunch too. I mean, all the time that I've spent with you has been just a real learning experience for me. It's so valuable to hear everyone's perspectives, and it's great to be able to wrestle with data and deliberate on such an important issue. So thank you.
Again, everybody, thank you. Again, to Dr. Fitchard, thank you. We'll see you all later. Have a great one.
Thank you all. Bye.